Yeah.
Hiding over there. Yeah. You're the senior guy.
Yeah, I'm going to do roll call on my side because
Yep.
it's calling for it.
Yep.
And then I'm just going to introduce you.
Do all right.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a joint committee meeting between the Economic Development Committee and the Planning Board for the town of South Kingstown. Today is Monday, February 3rd, 2020. And as customary, I'd like to start off with roll call. Maria Mack. Here. Joe Murphy. Here. Pam Rubinoff. Elise Torello. Here. Peter DiStefano. Here. And the chair is here. Also, since this is a joint committee, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Larry Fish, of the Economic Development Commission.
Thank you. The way we do our roll call, we each record our own. So Larry Fish here.
Joanne Esposito here.
Okay.
So we have discussion points, item number 3. We have 4 items for discussion this evening. And let's start off with A, mixed use in commercial highway district, increased number of allowed floors and density. So I'm going to turn it over to Kayla Gray, our head planner.
Okay, I'm going to actually start with a little word to the wise for everyone around the table, which is that we are streaming the meeting live tonight, which means if you're speaking, anyone listening at home can only hear you if the microphone in front of you has that red button on. So we're going to do a little bit of sharing on microphones because we don't have quite as many as we have around the table. But if you have something you're saying, it's important to just make sure the mic nearest to you is on so that we're catching that and it's becoming part of our recording tonight. So with that, I will say the discussion items on the agenda tonight are largely brought to us by the EDC. And so I will likely hand this over to Larry Fish for discussion, aside from to say a bit by context, in terms of the planning board, this is something, I will say the commercial highway area is an area of town we're looking at for a lot of different reasons, through a lot of different topic angles right now. Have been talking about it a bit with housing. The Economic Development Commission certainly has been looking for it for some other considerations, but I think there are a lot of trends that I'm seeing in just community conversation we're having about this district in town, so I think it's an exciting place for us all to sort of hear what everyone's thinking.
Thank you, Kayla. The EDC has been working on the commercial highway district, and we've been focused on that for, since 2015, 16. And I believe Jay Newsom has provided everybody a copy of some of our correspondence with the planning board over the last few years. He'll be referring to that as he presents on the commercial highway district. Our recommendations from 2016, and then we actually did a property survey of all the owners, all the stakeholders in the commercial highway district, and we had a very good survey that had a lot of responses and is really typical. And I think some of the things that we'll go over tonight, and Jay will specifically talk about density and building heights and that kind of thing, and mixed use, are things that the property owners want, they would like, as opposed to some board or commission or town structure telling them what they should do with their properties. I think it's, the timing is right with the property owners, and I think in what Kayla's saying, that's the trend in municipalities right now. And so, Jay, would you take the microphone, push it on, and Jay's under the weather, so he's going to make his presentation tonight, and then he's going to scoot off to his bed.
Yeah, the slideshow. Oh, okay, it must be that one. Yeah, that's it. That's it. So I'm going to ask you all to multitask because Larry has given me 5 minutes. This slideshow runs 2.5. So if I could talk while you all look at some of these pictures and some of the information, I think I'm not sure exactly where we are tonight in that I don't know whether I'm preaching to the choir or to a bunch of recent converts or to people who might be converted, but I'm a mixed-use advocate. In 2016, early 2016, I went to a Center for Urban Development seminar at MIT and really got excited about, the potential of this town to change itself over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that's what we're talking about here, and we're not talking about overnight. The seminar was called The Future of Suburbia. There's a little blurb in the back of your handout there about it. People came in from all over the world and in different areas of the United States and the world. And in Massachusetts in particular right now, mixed use is really gaining a lot of momentum. Shopping centers are being reconfigured to have shopping below and housing above to make use of valuable space. The takeaway for me from the survey was, from the seminar, was that the Ring City concept, in which towns and small cities develop around a central core city, but do so in a way that becomes less dependent on the core city and more friendly and sustainable to its residents. Needed requirements are facilities such as hospitals, educational facilities, reasonably good shopping, and the density to support those. And I think we have all those things except the density. And to have density, you need housing for people. So when I came back from that seminar, I talked to Doug McLean, who was previously on the planning department staff, and found out that in 2006 an effort was made to increase the density and do these sorts of things in the Dale Carlia corridor. And it was rejected by the property owners and business owners because it was too complex. It was like 40 pages and was basically trying to add a lot of regulation and a lot of onerous things that the property owners didn't want to see. There was like 15 pages on signage alone. It was just too complex. So in any case, we decided at the EDC to pursue this again and did some major, not major, some things to try to get information for you all on the planning committee and the planning department to use. The survey that you have there is one of them. Another thing is some of the members of the committee surveyed regulations in different towns throughout New England to find out just exactly, what other towns similar to, nothing's just exactly like South Kingstown, but some towns are similar in terms of colleges and hospitals and all those things, and so we felt that might be a reasonable thing. So we can go to the next. Next slide. In your packet, you have information concerning the zoning regulations on mixed use in this town, zoning district commercial highway, and zoning district RM. It's on the second page you have there. On the third page, there are the zoning regulations for commercial downtown. And this is more like what you would see for a mixed-use environment. If you look at the setbacks and the building heights, it's quite different from what you see in the commercial highway district. On the slide that you see on the back one. On the slide that you see, you also have a copy of that. Currently, you could have a maximum of 2 dwelling units per acre in the commercial highway district. In the commercial downtown district, currently, you could have a maximum of 12. That maximum of 12 is kind of strange because you could get that all on one floor above a base floor with business. If you had 3 floors or 4 floors, you can see that you have a lot more potential for density there. Right now, we're very constrained. And I think what's happened here is that the zoning regulations probably have not changed for the past 40 or 50 years. And they were done at a time when people were looking to make suburbia and make the automobile king. And that was fine 40 years ago, and it worked for quite a while, but times have changed. Times are changing, and we need to look at the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years to put this town in a position where it needs to be to compete with other towns surrounding and to provide a place where people want to live and to provide a place that's sustainable. I've got some recommendations, and I could read these all to you, but rather than take up any more of your time, again, I know we're time constrained, I'd ask you to take a look at these at your leisure and maybe consider them at your meeting. Some of the things, one of the things I feel I'd hate to see missed would be number 9. We are changing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. One of the things we believe, this has always been I've been on the committee now for over 20 years, is that we have no power. We're just an advisory board. I love that. And so what we try to do is get you the data and do the research for the planning board or sometimes the town council and bring you the data. And that's what I think we're trying to do in this district tonight, is to show you comparable towns and what they have so that you have the data so that if you choose to increase density or allow mixed use in the commercial highway, you have the data of what other comparable towns have and save you the time to do that. Because I think this is all time sensitive. And does anybody else on the EDC want to add on, because this is not the Larry Fish show or the Jay Newsom show?
The survey up there that we did of various towns is on the screen. It's also in your handout.
As a general rule, the property owners would like to go up if they could, but a lot of the properties already have undergone major renovations and probably wouldn't work in their instance. But there are some properties right now under construction or anticipating construction where they could go up and add residential units on top of their commercial units, and that would also go to help on the affordable housing for the town. As a business owner in town, I'd love to be able to have 1 and 2 bedroom units that my employees could use that are affordable, that they wouldn't be coming in from Johnston or Providence or wherever. And they're all decent wage earners. So that's where we're coming from on number 1. You wanna, yes, go ahead, Sue.
I would just like to say that while I'm a big advocate of seeing some change in the Dale Carlia area, I think it's so central to South Kingstown that before I would just like to say that I know Jay's done a lot of work here, but I think we ought to really sort of understand what we could do with that area to make it a whole lot better than what it is right now. And I think adding density and adding height, all those things would make it better, but I'm a little concerned that if that is the sole focus of how we're trying to make it better, that we won't really make it better. And if we want that area to drive some economic development, then we need to be making the best use out of that land. It needs to be thought out in some way that relates to the strategic planning of the town in some greater fashion. So while I don't want to see any more, I'd like to think you could get at this problem before we have another drive-in or drive-through building that was really ugly. But on the other hand, I'm concerned that we don't have much of a plan yet. We've heard from the business owners, from the property owners, that they'd be interested in making it more appealing, more walkable, landscaping it better, but I don't know that we have a really cogent plan. And I think density and changing the height is part of that, but I think it's only a part of it.
Can I just refute that just a little bit? I think what we're driving at here is, or what Susan is driving at, is perhaps more of a comprehensive town plan with regard to this area, and I would definitely be against that. I think that the property owners have enough sense to build buildings within the constraints of a good zoning plan that provides the outline as all the other zones in the town do in terms of setback, height, and everything else. And the town's regulations in that zoning document can provide for things such as 30% coverage of the building on the lot, or 20%, or whatever, and then let the property owners decide whether they want a brick front or they want a clapboard front or whatever they want. I think the more we get into telling them how to build in terms of the architectural style and those things, the more problem we're going to have. And as you probably saw in those photos of the PowerPoint slide, the areas are not consistently one building after the other identical. They're different, and that makes character. If they're all the same, there's an impact on the character of the area. And you can look at the development up on Route 1, and everything is very similar and the same, and it's nice, but there isn't a lot of character there, and there isn't really a feel that I particularly think is attractive. I think variation and changes in architectural style are important, and the town shouldn't legislate that.
The one thing I would like to point out, is not our intention or inclination to do the planning board's job or the planning department's job. I think you guys are the ones that have the experience in the planning, and the planning department have the necessary requirements to do that. We're just trying to give you comparable towns, comparable things that they've done in mixed use on density and that kind of stuff. So, but we really believe that with the reconstruction on Old Tower Hill Road coming up, with bike lanes that go to nowhere, and more walkability and more ADA compliant, that the time is now right to allow some mixed use, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 floors or whatever. The property owners are not against it. They're looking to work with the town and create some regulations and new requirements to allow them to do that. It's in everybody's best interest, and it's another way of doing affordable housing.
Thank you, Larry. So a couple of comments, and I think, it's important when we look, and when I say we, the planning board looks at issues, and as most people know, we have site plan review on behalf of the zoning board. So if there's a site plan issue, they typically give it to the planning board, and we have that ability to make recommendations on the site plan and then refer that back to the zoning board. So that's a relationship that exists and has existed for quite a while. And again, ours as well as advisory to the zoning board. In the case, there was discussion about architectural review, and we also have that ability. The planning board has through the SMD, so through the Special Management District, which is basically Route 1. And when you look at Route 1, I'm going to target the village at South County Commons, which we have architectural review. And I think the rationale there was to provide continuity. Although, I'll be very honest, I don't think we haven't really exercised it very much, and primarily because it's in the developer's best interest to maintain continuity of that entire property. So I think the developer's not about to put up some oddity in the midst of something that he knows could impact that very development. So, but we have exercised in some cases. The most recent was the Fairfields Inn Marriott Hotel, and that was within our purview, but again, working with the applicant so that everybody agrees and it's consistent. So, but again, it's primarily just within the Special Management District. On the other, there was a comment made about, we don't see enough applications where a second level is proposed, and I would agree with that. And most recently, we just did, and that was, everybody knows Healy's News. And so that application came to the planning board recently, by which they're proposing to put residential above that entire block, and that was exciting to see. That's as you know, it's a CD, commercial downtown zone, and we're very excited to see. Do we need enough? We don't see it enough, and that's the sad part. So I would agree we need to incentivize more of that kind of activity, because it's the density that I think is realistic, makes sense. And for the downtown area in particular, it supports the restaurants, it supports the other businesses located in the area, and it's walkable, which is another prerequisite or an appealing notion for selling and marketing, this kind of a unit. Excuse me. So, so I think there's common understanding of between what I'm hearing so far to date, and I'd like to hear more, not only from the Economic Development Committee, but also from my members here on the planning board, because I think we're going down parallel tracks. We just haven't met yet, and that's that I'm hoping over time we will. Jay?
I'm happy about the Healy development too, but as I mentioned in the document here, that could have been 3 stories, or it could have been 4 stories. The height restrictions are not there. I mean, you can go to 40 feet, but the density restriction that we have on commercial downtown limits it to 12 per acre. And when you factor that into the amount of space that's there, it's going to limit the ability of that property to really be maximized.
Mr. Chairman, if I may for just a second, I've been reminded by a viewer at home, microphones need to be on. Make sure your light is on before speaking.
Any comment from any of the planning board members?
Just had a question of clarification. Kayla, so in that area, what is the height? Is there a height restriction on the zoning for commercial downtown?
Yes, 40 feet. Yep. Jay's got his research is absolutely
40.
Is absolutely lined up. So
Okay, thank you.
in the commercial downtown zone, where the Healy's News property is, it's 5 feet higher than it is in the area beside Old Tower Hill Road. So Old Tower Hill Road has a 35-foot height maximum. The commercial downtown zone sees that increase up to 40.
The key is to allow having that third floor up above, or fourth floor, depending on how you're going.
I'd like to see higher densities in the downtown area, and I like to see mixed use. It seems like one of the constraints, though, it turns out to be the parking. So recently we had a project in front of us. It was a proposed single story. The first floor was a kind of a coffee restaurant. I think the owner would have liked to have gone up, but he was already full as far as the parking goes. So just wonder if you have any ideas as far as, do you think our parking is too conservative, or do you think there's a different solution to that problem? Because I think that is going to be one of the biggest constraints we have.
Jay, turn on your microphone.
If you notice in the handout that I gave you, I addressed that. I think that the first floor, when you look at some of these pieces of property, the first floor, I mean, are you going to do 10,000 square feet of business, maybe 10,000 square feet? Behind that, on the first floor, you could have parking. There's no question about it. With the proper engineering and safety standards, you can have parking on that first floor underneath the residences, and therefore you can pick up a lot of extra parking places. I think the business aspect is very important, and in facing the street, it's very important for the dynamics that we want, that I would like to see in any case, and then behind the building, on the first floor, room for parking.
How about is residential the same way? It seems, again, I'd like to see the density increase. I'm not sure we can meet those densities with the parking requirements. That would be that seems, again, kind of would be the constraint. So.
Yeah, I also think parking's changing, right? Like, my wife's from Boston. You go up there, most people don't even own cars. They Uber, they take public transportation, they ride their bike to work. They do a lot of other things. I think we're talking about the coffee shop that you mentioned. He wanted to go above and add more parking spots. They're putting in a bike path so people can ride their bike to get coffee. Obviously, we don't need that many parking spaces. So I do think the parking requirements definitely need to be changed to allow for more use.
I guess the town requirement for parking for residential is what, 2 per dwelling? Yeah, that should probably change. I mean, the car sharing and bicycles and things like that. When people move into an area of high density, and they know they're only going to have one parking place, they either move there and take one parking place, or they don't move there. So, I mean, I think the market will address itself. And the ride sharing.
I guess what I'm hearing is you think our parking regulations, we should be looking at those and perhaps making some changes.
Parking under the buildings, parking requirement for the number of spaces per dwelling, and car sharing. All those things are going to happen over the next years, I think.
I certainly share Jude's concerns that the initial study for this was done in 2006. And I believe that the Planning Board has long been advocates for a revitalization of this area. However, it's not as simple as one might think. Just the conversation, parking, density, housing, in particular affordable housing, circulation. Recently, the URI Department of Landscape Architecture Senior Studio class did a study of this area. It was a very thorough study. Some of the maps are here this evening, but there are about 20 of them, so I couldn't bring all of them. They have some really interesting ideas, much of which is focused on design, because when you change your ordinances, you need to think about all of these issues and how integrated they are and what the kind of cause and effect is. The other thing, and the board has certainly heard this from me in the past, but I'd like to pass it around to the Economic Development Committee. This is a book called Pocket Neighborhoods, and you'll see that it encompasses a variety of site plans and different styles. As Jay was referring to, one single style isn't necessarily the best, but this is a way of building smaller, affordable housing units, which we really need, and integrating them into neighborhoods, whether they are various commercial neighborhoods or adjacent to commercial areas. So I think this is an important component that we all need to think about.
Thank you, Maria. Any additional comments? Yes.
Yes, I just want to say one thing, because I think maybe I didn't make my point clear enough in the beginning, but we're the Economic Development Committee, not the Zoning Board, so I want to keep reminding us that one of the things that I think we need to think about is the way in which this community could potentially grow, not just grow economically, grow in its population. And I think to do that, you need to sort of sit back and say, what are our, not to take a long time about it, but just to say, what are our basic assets? What is it we can build on? What is it that will draw people to this community? And I'd just like to remind everybody that we already have a bike path that is a piece of infrastructure that goes zippity-doo right through the town. It connects libraries and schools and housing and all kinds of things. And if it could get tied in better to downtown, to Old Tower Hill Road, to the beach, we could begin to take a stab at becoming sort of an eco-tourism kind of place where we had people who would come in the summer because they wanted to bike. We could make people, we could suggest that people bought or came with electric bikes or bikes powered by a little motor. They could come, there could be businesses around renting those things. You could go to the beach, and instead of having to haul your own chairs, there could be people who would provide you with chairs the way they do in Europe, or provide you with towels, and that would all be those would be facilities. But I think there are opportunities in the town that as we think about how we get more people to live here, we also have to think about why people would want to come. And I'd like to see a lot more attention paid to the sustainability of what we're building, and to think about how you would draw people in to have more economic activity as part of living here. So that was my point was not about architecture, it was about trying to tie what we're doing into some bigger scheme as to what the town sees as its future. And that may not be a future other people share, but it's one I think we could consider.
So I think, Ms. Marcus, you raise a good point. And so as everybody knows, we're completing the town's comprehensive plan. No easy task, and Kayla will tell you firsthand. It's very difficult at best. Taking in comment from various peoples on the plan. The plan, as it stands now, is roughly a little over 300 pages. And it basically does. It's the guide, it's the development guide for the community. And I think in that particular plan, and when I look at zoning, and in particular, if you look at commercial and industrial in particular, and my fellow planning board members have heard me say this many times, they're tired of hearing me say it, but when you look at the town's land use, and in particular industrial and commercial, all three industrial sectors, 1, 2, 3, and commercial highway, commercial downtown, a commercial neighborhood. We're talking roughly about 1% of our town is zoned commercial. The other 1% in town is zoned industrial. So that's roughly 2%, approximately 2% of the land. Yet that 2% generates over 10% of the town's revenue. So from an economic development perspective and from a comprehensive plan perspective, we're basically saying this is where we want development to occur in these zones, unless we decide that it's time to rezone. And that's always an opportunity that we have, but of course that track is far different. Zoning changes are approved by the council, and they take time. But in essence, if you look at the zone as we know them today along the highway, Route 1, and the area that we're talking about, Dale Carlier Corner up to Route 1, Dale Carlier Corner coming down Main Street, going up and away, heading west, that's what you have, and there's others, obviously, in West Kingston and other parts of the community, Peacedale in particular. But those are your zones, and 2% of that generates 10.5. I'm not advocating that we just turn everything into commercial or industrial. Far from it. If anything, the plan again, as it's being established, has supported the zones that we have in those areas, and now it's a question of, which I think is really the purpose of this meeting, is to look at how do we develop those properties, not to the highest use or best use, but optimally, so that it makes sense. And that's where I concur with Sue Marcus on this one, that it has to be the right kind of development, but the zoning and the land use tables tell us that. So, and I think that's another item that I, at least in reading the materials that the Economic Development Committee brought to us, is looking at the land use tables. And that's also another subject matter that we're going to get into here very shortly. So, and we have done this, and if you look historically, and I'll use the Peacedale Mill as a representative sampling. And the Peacedale Mill, across from former pump house, basically is an industrial zone. And its land uses were pretty much industrial. But if you look at how that mill has been repurposed today, there are an industrial user, and in particular it's the Sons of Liberty. They manufacture. So by the nature of what they do, they fit into the land use. But there's the baseball academy, and that is not an industrial use. So what did we do? The planning board at that time went in and we looked at the land use tables and said, what makes sense for a vertical mill when vertical in the industrial sense is no longer preferred? On the industrial side of the house, everything is preferred to be horizontal. And if you go to Quonset, you see very large spaces that are just horizontal. So I think, we've had successes in modifying the land use tables so that they're reflective of what we're trying to do with properties in the community. And the Peacedale Mill is a classic example. And if you look at it for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much full. I don't want to say 100% because that's not accurate, but some of the other uses in there. The plumbing supply house, and as another example. So it's good that we're talking about this, and I agree. We do really need to look at land uses under the industrial zone. Another look-see at the commercial highway designations and see what makes sense. So something to consider, something we should continue to have dialogue on.
One of the conversations that has come up relative to this commercial highway corridor is one about making it more livable, more walkable, as Peter said, more bikeable, making it at more of a human scale, because right now there are safety issues and it's very auto-centric. So we need the combination of making it attractive, safe, so that people will want to live there, will want to shop there. And also, back to your original point about the surveys, one idea might be to develop another survey for the people who might shop there. We're always talking and hearing about Amazon-proof businesses. So why not survey the people in the community and find out what would bring them to the area? What kind of destinations would they be in favor of?
I guess one thought I would like to I'm not sure what everyone's background here is, but I know Kayla is a professional planner, so I'd love to hear Kayla's feedback on this and your thoughts as the town planner, what that looks like for you, a professional.
I'll take that cue up for me, Peter. So I guess I'm gonna step back to the beginning on where we started here, which is I'm actually going to say something that is different than what was written on one of those slides. So bear with me. One of the slides we saw tonight said that the commercial highway zone allows 2 residential dwelling units per acre. I'm going to tell you all, the commercial highway district allows no dwelling units per acre. And that is a fundamental thing to be aware of, because at the end of the day, part of the reason we've ended up with the development pattern we see out there are the choices we've made over time that have led there, right? I don't think that's news to anybody, but if you think about it, commercial highway zones developed at a time when we were seeing large-scale retailers come in, where we were an auto-centric, we still are, right? But we're moving away from it, hopefully, being an auto-centric community, culture, really. And so we looked at that area, and the land use there tells me a story of saying, we want this commercial space to be commercial alone. We don't want it to compete with residences like our downtown zone does. We don't want to be vying for this space for other uses. We want to have spaces for these large retailers that we're seeing in our development patterns. You end up with a commercial highway zone that says no residences allowed out here, only the commercial, only with large amounts of parking, and only to allow these larger scales of development, right? That's just not the world we live in today, right? It's not the world, and it's certainly not the world we see ourselves moving towards. It's not the world I hear the community of South Kingstown talk about becoming. And we really see ourselves moving in the future, South Kingstown, Rhode Island, New England, I'll just keep getting larger in that. We see ourselves moving to this idea of having nodes of development, places where there are multiple reasons to be in a space. You're there because you live there, because you can get a cup of coffee, and because you can work there, because you can get outside and get on your bike, and because you can also get some groceries on the way, right? We see that is the development style culturally we're moving more towards. And I'm going to first start by saying this is a great conversation to be having, because what I hear around the table is different ways that individual people have internalized that change. Right? What does that mean to you all? What do you see happening different because of it? And I do think that fundamentally, what we see built is largely a product of the way we regulate it. And the way we regulate it can sometimes be very clear by saying no residence is allowed here, only commercial. It's also in a lot of small, backhanded ways, by saying for every 350 square feet of retail space, you need a parking space, and that parking space will require 350 square feet of pavement, right? By that alone, I think about the way these things interact with each other. So if we increase lot coverage percentages for a building, you need to think about what that then means to decrease the parking for it. Because at the end of the day, we all still need to be environmental stewards of the planet we live on, right? So we still need to handle that stormwater, be accommodating it. And so all of these pieces largely are a factor of small pieces. I was thinking about it when I was reading over some of this material a bit before the meeting, and realizing that it's sort of the sum of all of the parts that ends with what we land on today, right? Parking changes, building height, densities allowed, they all partner to each other, and you could very easily take a quick or not well thought out approach to changes like this that don't result in the change you want to see for your vision, because you haven't looked at all of the parts that are actually building up to what is really being built on the ground. There are many times that regulators and people like planning boards, community boards, commissions, sort of people we have in the room tonight, we don't always see those little pieces, right? We don't always notice that there is some small hang up that also goes in it. So I think what I'd say is, with all of that, it leads me to a position where I say, I think the commercial highway area is an area that there is likely great consensus in seeing improvement needed. I think defining what improvement means and figuring out the details that get us there without moving away from something else, because oftentimes those little details are there for some other beneficial reason. A lot of times building height requirements relate to the fire district and the amount of equipment they have and their ability to respond to things, right? There are mechanisms that sort of support why we end up with some of the metrics or numbers that we see. But at the end of the day, I think it takes a cohesive look at it, and it takes understanding where you want that area to be and figuring out how you make that become the easier thing for a property owner to do. The more straightforward thing, the thing they can understand better, and the thing that seems to work for everybody.
Mr. Chairman, there's just one more thought in this vein that I think might be of benefit to the EDC members and maybe the public to hear about, and that is one of the things that the Town Council has done over the last couple of years is take the largest investment in affordable housing funds and put that into a study of the zoning around affordable housing and commercial mixed use, with the idea that housing belongs with commercial mixed use. I don't know how much of a summary might be helpful, but if you could just describe that project, that might be helpful.
So that project is largely why I said I feel as though mixed use in the commercial highway district, there are many people looking at for many different angles and reasons. And so that project is largely focused on figuring out what are townwide approaches to improving the diversity of our housing stock. So it's not just necessarily getting more units. Yes, we need more units. We also need units that people can age in place in. I need fewer people standing in my office saying, oh, well, I was interested in that, but I need one level living because I'm aging, right? And seeing that there's a shortage of those types of units, right? We need a different shape of housing as well. We need smaller units, some larger units. We need things that are accessible to all people. We need a diversity of pieces, and that means being able to build at different scales and shapes, right? But so a lot of that has been talking about town-wide things that are relatively compatible with single-family residential zones and figuring out the areas where we can think beyond a single-family residential zone into more of a dynamic neighborhood. And that is where the commercial highway district and the idea of mixed-use development has started folding into that conversation as well.
And the objective of that study, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is to get a new zoning regulation recommendation to the planning board so that the planning board can move new regulations to the town council. So this is a very specific study by Horsley Witten to come up with a new zoning regulation that will improve affordable housing, or that will support affordable housing in a more robust way. And part of that is to look at how affordable housing and commercial mixed use can be adopted in places like the downtown neighborhood zones and the commercial highway zone. So it's a very specific, very clear movement toward better regulation, which is the groundwork for the sort of development that's been discussed tonight.
Hi, Joanna Esposito. I just wanted to just kind of reiterate what Larry had said, that the study that we had done a couple years ago with the property owners along the commercial highway were all very eager to cooperate and to get something going and begin the whole conversation with the mixed use. Regarding parking, I find if I go to Westerly or East Greenwich, I'm not afraid to walk, a few blocks or several blocks if I want to go to a certain restaurant or the Varnum or something for an event. So I don't think we have to be so limited and so concerned about the parking. If you build the right uses, I think people will come, so that whole idea. So just wanted to mention that.
Go ahead, Pam.
Just a question. So here we have the landscape architecture. That was a class assignment. We have to remember that these were students. And I'm hearing different things about changing zoning. I'm also hearing about kind of implementing a vision, developing a vision and implementing that. And yes, we've gone through our comprehensive plans. And so I guess I'm just curious as to, and I think that we just have to think about this in the realm of how many things is the planning board and the rest of the committees doing, but is it appropriate to take a deeper dive into something like a a more detailed vision of the commercial highway so that we could then really answer that question about what does the mixed use look like together with the housing, together with the transportation. So it's a new kind of village plan. And Kayla, maybe you could just share if we've been thinking about that. Is that something that we should be looking at to the future? Because we have these very basic concepts and then lots of recommendations.
Yeah. There are lots of recommendations. I'm going to use a buzzword, so bear with me. There's been a lot of synergy. There it is, that's the buzzword. There's been a fair amount of synergy around this area, and so I'm going to say that the students' work actually was informed by the EDC. It's one of the reference documents they used to help guide their work to look at what it was to be environmental stewards or have a sustainability angle to it. But so there's a lot of different, and then we've just talked about the housing project and what's been going on there. I'm going to share a data point while it's in my mind, which is that in the housing study, we did a survey and of about 300 people who completed a question asking how much more development they think is appropriate in this area, in the commercial highway zone. It was resoundingly the area of town people felt most comfortable with the idea that there could be increases in density and that would be okay. Over 50% of the people who completed the survey said lots of growth or significant growth would be okay to them out there. That is considerably different than many other areas of town where we feel like the character of what's there should be kept as is and that modest growth should be proposed. So I think for all of those reasons, there is a lot of things that puts us directed at looking specifically about what it is to do meaningful mixed use and to redevelop an area of town that we see right now as being one that's facing future challenges to itself, right? There are challenges coming, more challenges coming to retail. And there are more challenges coming in having an area of town where there aren't residences in close proximity to it. I think it is something that could handle a deeper dive. I will say that I think about it. The work next is to get everyone on board to figure out where we want to go with it, but it's something that I anticipate as being a necessary step to see significant change there, is to get a really, really good understanding of that area holistically and move and really honestly craft regulation and change specific to that area in a small enough arena that we can understand what that change means. But yes, Pam, in a very long and roundabout way.
Jay, before you start, Jay, I'm mindful of the clock, so it's 5 minutes before 8, and we are still on item number 1. But after Jay's comment, I think I'd like to wrap up on that topic and move on to the other. So go ahead, Jay.
I'd just like you all to take a look at consideration number 10. I think this is very significant, and I think that one of the problems we have with the area we're talking about is pavement. It's paved over, and it's creating water management problems, significant water management problems. And I think one of the significant benefits that can be had from intelligent redesign of the area is to get stormwater management in control or in better control. And if you notice there, 2018 and 2019, we had over 65 inches of rain measured at the University of Rhode Island weather station. And for one period of 12 months, I think it was August to July, this past July, the previous August, we had over 70 inches. Subtropical rainforest is equated at 56 inches. And the change in rainfall over the last 70, 80 years in this town, along with the development of a mass parking lot, has just absolutely created problems that are going to get worse as far as that area is concerned, and the area below it, down toward the bowling alley, down toward Saugatucket Creek, the flooding that we encounter there, it's just going to get worse. So we have a chance to do things, and my thought would be we shouldn't make any stupid mistakes, but we should try to move with haste and intelligent haste to get this thing underway, because it's going to take 20, 30 years for it really to start to happen. Developers are not going to come in instantaneously and say, oh, we can do it now, we're going to do it. It'll take time. So the longer we wait to start, the longer we're going to put up with what we've got. Thank you, and I'm going to go home and take some more medicine.
Thank you, Jay.
Ready to go on to the...
All right. See, this typically happens at a planning board level. We always get, a couple of others, so I'm going to give it to Elise.
Clearly, we're not starting with a blank slate in this zoning district. And looking at the survey, there's a lot of positive things in here about people's, willingness to change the way it looks and the way things have been done as far as parking and building height and density. Did you get a sense of the willingness of individual property owners to do that within their own property, or was this more of kind of a helicopter view? But no, I'm willing to, next time I undertake a major renovation of my property, to move my building forward, reconfigure the parking, do better stormwater, and go up and put housing, or is this more of a, yeah, it's a great idea for the zone in general, but I kind of like my piece the way it is?
Specifically, I talked to 2, possibly 3 of the current landowners, and they would have liked it to happen tomorrow so that they could build the next day.
The property owners that I talked to were very enthusiastic about having mixed use, and some of them actually were forced to proceed without doing the kind of expansion that would have allowed above the commercial area, residential, just because the zoning was not in place. So, in short, I found in the interviews that I conducted, there was enthusiasm over that.
Just the last thing that I wanted to mention was, I think Larry started the conversation with something that related to 2006, and now it's 2020. I've been called an impatient person, which I understand we need to be patient and plan and get this stuff straight. But I think if we don't come away from this meeting with some kind of action item or some next step, we just sat around a room for an hour and wasted everybody's time. So I think there should be something that says, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to move forward. I know it's not going to happen tomorrow, 10 years, 20 years, but we got to do something now, or we're just going to have the same meeting next year and talk about the same thing.
Great. Thank you, Peter.
Just to add to what Peter just said, there's a tremendous amount of analysis that went into the URI work. I think that we should find a way to get at least the professor, Will Green, and all the maps into the same room and begin the conversation and use that data so that we can be creative and use some of their concepts, which are not pie-in-the-sky concepts, by the way. They're very realistic ideas.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just for the record point out that because the council has so directed, $100,000 are being invested in a study to come up with specific regulatory recommendations that will be reviewed by the planning board. I think your work plan's sort of already in there. I think that's exactly what that study is all about, is making sure that you're examining not only the affordable housing in isolation, but affordable housing as part of a commercial mixed-use zone.
Here goes the private sector and me coming out again, and that report is due when?
So that report is actually late, and the focus of the report has shifted to be much more specifically aimed at making recommendations about the zoning regulation. The original effort was a little bit more fluffy, I would say, much more about sort of getting a sense of everyone's views of everybody else's neighborhood. This is much more, I would say, at this point, focused on making sure that there are specific recommendations built from successes in other jurisdictions. When we're going to see that report, Kayla may have more information than I have.
Yes.
So, I just want to, so again, I'm mindful of the clock, and clearly I agree. We have, and for those who don't know, the planning board meets twice a month. So we meet the second and the fourth Tuesdays of the month. The second is dedicated to a work session where clearly this dialogue is going to continue, which is a good thing. And I hear the sense of urgency coming around from everybody. And of course, the fourth Tuesday of the month is where we actually review applications and really get into the weeds with applications. So I appreciate the dialogue, and Kayla, I'm going to give you the last word since you were ready to put your mic on. So go ahead.
I'll be so very quick. So the plan on that project is that we will see waves of regulatory change come out. The first ones will likely be things like cottage zoning, accessory dwelling units, things that we're going to do town-wide that were sort of low-hanging fruit. The second rollout of that, in my mind's eye, we would be doing wrong if it is not specifically mixed use. So that's about as close as I can get to a timeline for you, but I would say it'll be a major point of work over the spring and summer.
Thanks, Kayla. Okay, moving along, we're going to go to item B, which is the property behind Prout School, approximately 30 acres plus, and it's zoned R80. And we're talking about the potential reuse, the repurposing of the property, and how to go about that in a positive way. Just to give people a little bit of context on the property, you don't see it from the highway, but if you're heading north on Route 1, coming from the top of Salt Pond, and as you get into Government Center, as you start to go down to the intersection of Fairfield Inn and Suites is on your left. So as you go through the intersection, literally, not even 200 feet on the right is the driveway entrance that goes to the rear of the property. You can't see it from the highway. It was the home of the Sisters of the Cross and Passion right up until about 3 years ago. And then the church, for whatever reasons, the order moved, and the property has been for sale for about that length of time, about 3 years. So it's a very nice property, very unique property, and so this discussion is just to get a sense of what could be done with the property, acknowledging it's a R80 zone at this point. And I want to give Rob the time to talk a little more about that property.
Mr. Chairman, just a cautionary note. I know the Economic Development Committee has some thoughts about what might appropriately be done with that site. I will point out that we have potential purchasers of this property coming through Town Hall all the time. I would not want this conversation to get into any particular person anyone in the community may know about who has an interest in it, and I also don't want the conversation to become so detailed that we prejudice anyone who might be coming with an idea. This should be a high-level conversation about the types of use that EDC and planning board members, you guys are under more constraints than the EDC on this, but the types of use that might be appropriate in that neighborhood and what we might do with a big parcel that is obviously a big potential use for the community. We are in a live real estate market situation with this property, so I don't want us to get off track.
I think the purpose and intent to have that on the discussion agenda was just to give a cursory overview of that piece of property, because I think it's low-hanging fruit, or we think it's low-hanging fruit, and but it can't be repurposed without a lengthy process through the planning board and the town. I think it's our intent, and we'd like to be on record that this could be made a special management district. And if you do that, it opens up dialogue and a give and take of whoever is interested in that property, so that it can move through the processes, if it's an acceptable use, a lot quicker and more efficiently, so that it gets repurposed sooner rather than later. And it's a very big parcel, a very important parcel, and I think it has tremendous possibility where there'd be an investment of many millions of dollars that we could add on to the tax rolls, and I'd like to see that, well, we'd like to see that sooner rather than later. So if you could preempt something so that proper development occurs, we think it's in the town's best interest to do so. And I think I'd like to leave it at that from a committee purpose, and real quick, and then we'll go on to C.
Just a clarification. How much of the property is buildable, approximately, of the 30 acres? I thought there were wetlands or...
Not too many.
Okay, fine.
Goes down, borders the Chafee Management.
Right. You can see in the image right up here where the J is on John H. Chafee, the property, property line just a little bit further east of that.
So elevation-wise and wetlands-wise, it would still be buildable. Okay.
Include any CRMC oversight or restrictions, seeing as it's adjacent to?
Well, it does have abutters, and, federal government is one of the abutters. To the south is the family court, as you look at the image, the family court, which is the state of Rhode Island. To the west is the Prout School, which is zone GI right now, government institution. And then to the north of the property is a residential zone. And I think most members on the planning board will remember that's actually an approved subdivision, that parcel which is north of this property, for 34 units, which we haven't seen any action on yet, but it's there for 34 units. So I think, clearly, should something materialize, there's going to be the interest of the community, there's going to be the interest of the abutters. And so it's just a question of, I agree with Larry on this, how do we provide a seamless application process so that we don't, that we're sensitive to the value of the property, willing to work with a prospective buyer, and work on the uses that make sense for the community. Again, it's something that is important and will help build their confidence in, number one, buying, and also to moving forward with a development project. So,
I'm just gonna say something about this. I think to the CRMC question, land designated as self-sustaining in this SAMP, but we can check on that. There's certainly a land use category that goes with the parcel relative to the narrow river. But one thing that I think I would say about this is we talk a lot about different types of resources that we have, and while I have not seen the building myself, so maybe I'm the wrong person to be the one saying this, my understanding is that the structure that's on that property is unique, historic, and pretty impressive. And so that sort of adds to what makes redevelopment in an R80 zone a bit of a challenge, because R80 zone is very easy to subdivide and put individual single-family homes on. It's a little bit more challenging when you have a structure that is very large, that there actually might be some interest in seeing retained on the site. There's some unique features to that property that in the future I'm sure there'll be some engaging conversations on it.
I just drove because I knew it was on the agenda and I'd never seen it. I recommend you do this. You do have to trespass because it says private property, and I did that this afternoon.
Never stopped you before.
Never. It is, the old building that's there is quite interesting, and it's nowhere. I mean, it's behind Prout School, it's off Route 1. It's not exactly a neighborhood that's transit-oriented or that's close to schools or shopping. I mean, the Prout School, but that's private. So I sort of thought it looked just fine, tear down the stuff that wasn't original and hope somebody comes along and buys the old house. But you should go look at it, Kayla. It's worth looking at.
okay, Sam?
So it sounds like I honestly have not looked at that spot. I didn't go trespass, Susan. But I'm just wondering, it sounds like some people here already have some ideas. I don't know. I'm just putting out, I'm looking at John, I'm looking at Larry. You know, you guys have, have you thought of this?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would suggest we have, over the last couple of years at least, had numerous folks come in with various ideas. Again, I would strongly caution folks against a conversation that sort of favors one or the other, because we're still fielding inquiries in this area. The item is on the agenda because the Economic Development Committee has identified a large parcel that has significant potential. However, we have potential developers who may identify a completely different use, and I don't want anyone here, I don't want us as a town to be sending the signal, we like this and don't like that, because we're not there.
Correct. And the EDC doesn't have any predetermined notion on any kind of development there, nor any specific one. We just think it's low-hanging fruit that is a very unique piece of property that would never be able to be redeveloped into anything under current zoning in R80. So possibly if I don't know what the process is to make it that 30 acres a special management district unto itself, I think it would lend itself for proper and quicker development. That's all.
And I don't mean to be a pain in the proverbial about it. It's just I'm a little nervous about sending signals.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think with that said, let's move on to item C, and thank you for the discussion about that particular item. Larry, I'm going to give this one to you. As you and I chatted, this was of interest to the EDC.
Correct. Last year, the landscape architecture class that Will Green does every year did a plan on the Saugatucket River and how it relates to Main Street. And we had a semester's worth of work specifically on that, on how to enhance Main Street. And we've got this great potential with the Saugatucket River there, but really we don't really use it. It's not picturesque, and so Will Green's students came up with a variety of possibilities and ideas on how to develop it that included making it walkable from the bike path. Excuse me. I'm supposed to be taking my meds. From the bike path and along the river and going down to that's actually a town park right where the cursor is right now, and then by the fish ladder, and then behind South County Orthopedic up along to the school and hooking back up with the bike path behind the school. And some of the ideas were to have an area on the school property that would have you're all over the place. You're doing all right. You're doing all right. An amphitheater that underneath the amphitheater had stormwater management processing facility or whatever. I mean, I'm way over my head in capability, but I do know that instead of just having all the stormwater from the High Street side just going in somewhat unprocessed into the river isn't good for the river. But if we could clean that in a facility right in that circle there, and the land contour is such that you could put an amphitheater right where they always have the parades end at the War Memorial there. That amphitheater would be able to be used for multiple events, and it would make the downtown area on High Street more walkable, and you could use parking on the weekends at the school and come across a lot easier, and there's other things to do besides just walk, and open up. There's a lot of invasive species in that area of the river where you can't even see the river. A lot of places, old, rusty fences, and so the students came up with a lot of ideas, and I think some of the members of the planning board were part of the survey and everything else. And I just don't want it just to sit there and say, that's another nice thing that we could do in this town, and no action take place. I'm from private sector, and we do action. We don't study. We do some studying, but we like to get moving and get something done. The parking lot that's town-owned behind the Bell Block floods. They've tried to do some things with it. Stormwater from Main Street is a problem. I see Mr. Bell out in certain times of the year pushing with a squeegee water out of the stores and his property on Main Street because it backs up. And I believe there's some avenues to get some grants and state stormwater management funds to make some of these visions possibly a reality. Maybe not all of it, but and in this climate of taxation and really pushing the tax rate, especially with the school issues, it's not like we're going to be able to come up with a couple of $1 million and the taxpayers do it. It's the EDC's vision that there are avenues where we can get creative and get some funds to possibly process the stormwater the correct way and get some redevelopment in this area that would make the waterfront more usable. Your turn.
As Larry said, this was a really great project, and there's nothing worse than having a wonderful project that then sits on the shelf. That said, I believe that there are certain steps that need to be taken. Amongst your committee, you have a varied amount of talent. You have communications, you have tech, you have market research people, you have good writers. I believe that the next step should be to develop a strategic plan for Main Street and the Saugatucket. You can use the Wakefield Village Master Plan to build off of, as well as the study from the students. If you have a thorough plan with specific goals that would ultimately result in steps that could be taken and measurable results, one of Rob's favorite terms, I might add, and rightly so. I believe that you would be able to generate funds from the public and private sector. I actually brought a list of links to various organizations that could be extremely helpful, from managing stormwater to the National Main Street Program. There was a Main Street Conference. They have been in the business for 40 years of helping communities to redevelop and reinvest. There are state grants, but you need to be well organized in order to be viable for those grants. And once you get that first grant and have established yourself, then more will come your way. So I really believe that the next step should be to really write a thorough strategic plan. And I know that Susan had something that she had done early on as well. That let's see her one.
Yeah, I just we did apply for a grant after this project. It was a national grant, and we fell short. But just let me say that I pulled the grant application out again. We thought those of us who worked on it was the old planning department. I don't know what they date this was, but the old planning department and several other groups around town, and what we were hoping for was to have the what do they call the Citizens Institute on Rural Design send us a body of people who would work with the community to establish a consensus about what we wanted to do, to consider the economic factors that would accrue to Main Street from making these changes, to determine the scope, the relative cost, and the implementation of the particular design we selected, and to develop drawings for use in requests for proposals from other people. We put a lot of work into this, but I think, I'd be willing to be at least part of a group that did it again, because I do think we are not at the point yet, same point I made before, I don't think we're at the point yet where we could take what the students did and say, this is what as a community we feel is the responsible thing to do here. There are issues of all sorts there, and we need to get a little closer to some kind of closure before we can actually try to develop something. And there are groups, as Maria says, there are groups, other ones we could apply to, and I think that's the right thing we should be doing is pick that up again.
Susan, what was the organization that
This is the CIRD. It's the Citizens Institute on Rural Design. Would you like a copy?
Yes, please. And is it a federal or is it a private nonprofit?
It's a private nonprofit,
Okay.
but it gets some federal funding. And they would have sent us a group of based on what we were asking for. They would have sent us a group of about 4 people who would have organized a couple of days' worth of citizens' discussion so that we could have come up with some sort of a proposal, which I think, to Maria's point, is something that the Economic Development Committee we can just sort of lay something out, but really it has to have some community buy-in. And that was one thing we did. We got letters of support from a lot of groups around town that were willing to work with us. But you may have that, John.
And the agency that, or maybe organization where you just came up a little short for funding, what was the name of that entity? You didn't say it. I was just curious.
No, we didn't. No, what I meant was we applied for this grant and we didn't get the grant. That's what I meant.
Okay, to this group. I understand. Okay, thank you.
Do we know why the grant was denied?
No.
Was there feedback?
Competitive.
I can tell
Really
you
competitive.
we had very stiff competition. I looked at the groups that won, and they just,
And they probably had strategic plans in place and were at a different place than
one of the
we are.
things was, there was an Indian group, a Native American group that won. There was some identity politics going on in there too. So that might not have been the right. Maybe this was a perfect thing for us because we had the work from the students, so we could have used that to charrette with the community. We could have said, these are the things we're talking. We already had all that work done, and so they could have come in and helped us, and the community could have looked at those things carefully, and then we could have narrowed all that down to something that was workable. Which is, I still think, the way we ought to proceed. We just need to find another group to bid, to apply to.
And in my experience, and I'm just, as you were talking, I'm thinking of 2 federal agencies that may, and have to look at the criteria again, is, USDA, RD, Rural Development, because I could see where this could be a business growth opportunity for existing businesses, and that would fit under the rural development criteria. Another could be through the U.S. EDA, which is the Economic Development Administration, and they provide 2 pools of money. One is technical assistance, basically planning, and the other is basically implementation, and their implementation is of, again, development project. It could be water, sewer, roadways, et cetera, and they are very active throughout the country. And the state has actually done pretty well with EDA funding on the technical assistance, which typically are about $100,000 to $150,000. On the implementation side, I've seen them as high as about $2.5 million. They typically are a dollar-for-dollar match, and a real dollar, not just in-kind contribution, so.
Unfortunately, this allows us to do a lot of in-kind matching. But we were asking, I don't remember, I didn't check the budget, but we were asking in that $50,000, $60,000 to run this, and it was the technical assistance, not that we are.
Yeah. I understand. All right. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very familiar with the USDA programs, and they would be a good match. And in that case, both in that case and the CIRD, rural refers to communities of less than 50,000 population.
Mr. Chairman, just one local thing to be aware of. The council at its last meeting preliminarily adopted a program that would allow for matching grants at the local level as well. So any organization that's willing to put money up for village infrastructure would be eligible, at least under this preliminary plan, which will be finally adopted by the council if the budget holds and if all goes the way everybody anticipates in April. The idea is to establish a fund through through a portion of the real estate conveyance tax to make matching grants for improvements of infrastructure in the villages. So if you're a village and you've got infrastructure needs and you've got somebody who's putting up money, the town would match that for infrastructure purposes. I don't want to get too deep into the description. I'm happy to talk to anybody about it offline. Essentially, the reason, though, is because we don't want to be in a situation where we're doing for some villages and not for others. The idea is to make sure that every village has the opportunity to improve the infrastructure in that village, and the town will participate. We've had questions about why would we put trash cans in front of one ice cream shop and not another ice cream shop, and the answer is we're matching their grant.
Any additional thoughts, suggestions from anybody?
Right now, we have the Wakefield Merchants Group, extremely active, so fantastic in terms of, I just got another email from Ken Burke and that whole committee of planning all the events. They have been so great in getting the events going, getting people downtown, and we should be building on that. That was the whole thing about the Saugatucket, that there's a lot of momentum. They are on board, where they're just, want to help in any way. So we might, we want to be including them too.
Oh, they were going to provide us the space. We were going to
I'm going to say 2 cents on grants. This is something that I don't think I've said to anyone in this room before, but I used to talk about it a fair amount with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which is grants are almost they're an odds game, right, at a certain point. And so the more times a grant proposal can go out to more organizations, the better. And I'm going to use that to say what I've mentioned to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee for, which is a document that tracked different funding opportunities, different grants that exist. I call it the Rainmakers spreadsheet, but basically something that identifies what different funding topics are, who funds under them, what they tend to fund, and what their funding cycles are, so that we can start to have a little bit more of a systematic approach to how we're pursuing grant funding for the town, right? So if we had an understanding of the Saugatucket River project, touches on stormwater, touches on downtown green space, touches on economic development, starting to get an inventory of that. It's a big lift to put together, but I think that with all of the different advisory committees we have, the amount of energy and commitment to topics that exist, there might be a way to break up that work, that it's not large, to put together a constant inventory that our department could be the steward of. Then it's just that initial push to get something like that to develop that is a bit more manpower than we have downstairs right now. But I would say if anyone wants to sort of work on something like that with me when it comes to just, because exposure is a consistent thing, right? We could submit this same grant again and have it denied, but if we had 6 or 8 ideas of how we might be in funding cycles repeatedly with it, might serve us better.
That's actually nice to hear, because when we did this, we got quite a bit of pushback take on it was, even though we were going to manage it and be responsible for making the match and all that, their view was it's really a lot of work. It is a lot of work to do these grants, and maybe it's not worth it. So your support would be very good to catch up on that.
Okay, I think we've killed item C. Moving right along.
Good. Item D. I know, and I'm going to turn this one over to Rob to provide some context. Clearly, he's been involved directly with the school department, and he has a direct role in those communications, and I don't want to begin to even think that I know how I could proceed, and then I'm going to, if you have the same...
I'm going to let him off the hook a little bit.
Okay.
The purpose behind D was that the school committee is obviously looking at closing this school or that school or repurposing this school or that school, and they're looking at it, as well they should, from a school perspective and student perspective. And what we're talking here is an economic perspective. If you close this school versus that school, or what can you do with the land if you change this school to that school, or whatever. And it could be an elementary school, it could be a middle school, it could be a senior high school, but our job is an advisory role. We have no power. I love it. All right? So you, as the planning board or the town council or the town manager, can use us to do investigative work or provide further information. And so we put this down as a topic in case that's something that the planning board would be interesting to know, or the town, or whatever. And it's just to be, we're not trying to go one way or the other, or we have no dog in the fight. We just are looking to see if possibly we could help the town in looking at it from, well, from the school standpoint, it could be this one or this way. It really doesn't matter. Well, this way, it will the property can be really, really developed and have a more return for the town versus that, or something like that. Now you can go ahead.
So this is a very live topic. It is not yet a live real estate market thing, so I'm not at all worried about what we don't like influencing a private transaction that may or may not be out there. First of all, we're going to be the seller if we sell property, so I'm not worried about querying anyone's deal. I'm happy to be working this problem. The current plan that's been approved by the school committee is to relocate the high school to Curtis Corner. That program is being investigated by the OPM, Peregrine, and Peregrine Group, I guess is the name of the firm, and RGB, the architect that's been retained by the school committee for this work. That investigation is not complete. There's still a lot of sort of legwork that needs to be done, but the OPM for that project and the architect have come back and have said it looks to us like we can make a project fit the budget, the town's budget of $85 million, which was identified through the CIP or in the CIP most recently, and we're going to figure out how to make it work on that site. We can take that site and make a high school possible for the budget that the town has said is available. That means that we'd be abandoning the Columbia Street property. So the reuse that we're really contemplating here is probably Columbia Street and possibly a portion of the Curtis Corner South Road parcel. It's possible that some portion of the South Road site could be repurposed. The Columbia Street project is an interesting project. It's a 230,000 square foot bunker. It's a concrete structure built in the 1950s. It is, in fact, through the study that was done through the Department of Education at the state level, Jacobs Engineering came in. They identified this as a building that's in pretty good shape in many regards. It needs mechanical systems, it needs a roof, it needs stuff, but it's a solid building. It was in fact the best building in the inventory using the index of performance or condition that the engineers use. But it's a 230,000 square foot high school building. Adaptive reuse of this building is not necessarily going to be an easy thing, and we're going to need the community to, help guide us toward prospective uses, because it's not likely to end up being an easy, successful, affordable housing without a whole lot of investment. We know from the engineer's report that this building's in need of at least $30 million worth of work. The fact that it's going to be, housing, or it's going to be a hotel, or it doesn't change the fact that it needs new mechanical systems. Doesn't change the fact that its plumbing is not up to snuff. It's going to need an awful lot of work. It's going to be an expensive project for whoever takes this on. It may, in fact, be a better solution for the community to simply demolish the building and make land, which is scarce, available. I tend to believe that at this moment that finding somebody who's going to be able to make an adaptive use of that building may be more difficult than finding somebody who's just looking for 7 or 8 developable acres in Wakefield. So there's a whole lot of questions that have to be addressed as we go forward. On the 22nd of this month, the first attempt to reach out to the community and start some visioning around what we'd like to see happen there will be taking place at the high school at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock for a couple of hours. We'll have a conversation with members of the community about what they would like to see happen at Columbia Street. We are obviously looking for tenants. If anybody knows a nice big institution like the University of Rhode Island, who we've already spoken to, the hospital, anybody who thinks that there might be a use for a 230,000 square foot bunker, we've got one and we'd like to talk to you. Beyond that, it really is a matter of visioning and deciding, what we'd like to see. There may be some expenses involved. To demolish that structure is not going to be an inexpensive proposition. And, obviously, at the end of it all, there might not be a taxable use. So the community's got to have that sort of conversation as well. If we were to be successful, we're trying to get CCRI excited about this location. It'd be great to get the community college down here. But they don't generate taxes and they don't generate a pilot payment either. So this is part of the conversation that the community has to have as we go forward. It's not just effective reuse of the building, it's optimizing the opportunity for the community. And these things are a trade-off. I mean, a CCRI campus would be great for the community in many, many ways. Having that activity, having those students come here would be wonderful. On the other hand, it's not going to maximize the tax revenue from that site. On the other hand, demolishing the building at taxpayer expense in hopes of making back the money on the sale of the land is not likely. We're not likely to break even on that proposition. However, if it were developed appropriately, we might see the revenue back over a term of years, because we're going to see the tax revenue coming in because we've given someone a green parcel to work with, as opposed to asking them to work with a building that is difficult to work with. So that's all something that's got to be worked through the conversation. I will touch briefly on it because it's already out there and folks are already sort of edgy about it. It is clearly the case that redevelopment of Curtis Corner and South Road would be easier for a developer, for a housing developer, for a mixed-use developer. It would clearly be easier to demolish a Curtis Corner than it will be to demolish Columbia Street. And it's also clearly the case that that site, Curtis Corner plus South Road, would yield a significant number of housing units. So if we were looking at housing over there, now all of this, who knows what objections there might be to putting a neighborhood there. Who knows, what a developer 3-4 years from now would be able to put in there in terms of the economy, in terms of all of the stuff that moves in the markets. But that would generate taxes. That's out there. Folks are concerned that Columbia Street is not as likely to generate certainly as many tax dollars as Curtis Corner and South Road would. These are the choices communities make all the time. Communities have to decide, do we need to chase the tax revenue or do we want a high school campus? This community is in the middle of that conversation, and it's something that's, something folks have got to engage in. It's something folks have got to be thinking about and talking about and trying to decide as the community goes forward. The economic uses of those parcels, though, in terms of business development, are probably pretty limited under both circumstances. We're probably not going to, we're never going to see, I go this far, we're not going to see a Target at Curtis Corner if the high school doesn't go there. We might see more housing than we would see at Columbia Street, but we're not going to see a shopping mall. So, the economic value here isn't the tax value. The economic value here is the number of transactions that happen in an economy because you have more opportunities for transaction. Neither one of these sites is likely to generate a whole lot more. Columbia Street probably has a greater potential for generating transactional economic activity. So it's complicated. It's fun to think about this stuff in the theoretical. It's important for everybody who's a member of this community to be thinking about it, talking about it, and expressing their views because we're in the middle of it. We're going to have to make some decisions pretty soon.
Who ultimately calls that shot as to what happens?
Which location is going to be the location for the high school? It's really the school committee makes the recommendation. Ultimately, the bond has to be approved for the construction of a high school, so it's the voters. The council has to agree to, move the project forward so that the voters have that opportunity. But ultimately, it's decided. The location, the project's fate is decided by the voters.
So the $85 million that would be going to the construction of the high school would be a bond issue?
It's $85 million for total facilities improvements in the schools. The current breakout would be $62 million for the high school, $17 million is the budget for a middle school improvement, and I think it's $6 million for elementary school improvements.
But that would all have to be...
All of that has to be approved by voters at a bond referendum.
I think the high school would be very nice as residential. Just take it over, turn it into some housing. You could have all kinds of people living in there and a little bit of commerce. It would be great.
So we will put a request for information out, or a request for ideas. An RFI is request for information, but I prefer to think about it as a request for ideas from the development community sometime this month. It'll happen after the 22nd. We're hoping to turn that around pretty quickly because we need to start getting some input from the market. So our objective is to get a request for information out on the street by the end of February so that we can have developers, not only in Rhode Island, but from throughout the region, tell us what they think might work. I will say that I'm dubious about residential redevelopment of that site because we've already had some conversations with the developers who say it's a tough building. So,
all right, in an effort looking at 8:45 to try to wrap it up before 9 or by 9, one of the reasons why we like to meet with the planning board is to get marching orders or where we should go so that we don't go somewhere where you have no desire to take up that topic. So what I've gotten out of the meeting tonight is on item A, that's basically in your court. We've given you all the information. Now the monkey's on your back. Item B, if you want to make it an SMD behind Prout, that's up to you guys. C, that's a monkey that's on our back. We should come up with a strategic plan and then go with information from the Wakefield Village Master Plan, etc. So we'll take that up as an item to work on, and item D, we're going to leave that alone and we're going to stay out of that mess. Is there anything else from the planning board on any other issue that you would like us to determine and take up at one of our subsequent meetings on something that we would like to, that you would like to have us delve into?
I think no.
Yeah, he's more, he's a doer too. Yeah.
And Larry, before I answer your question, and what I really want to do here is we have a good audience mix, and as customary on the planning board, we'd like to get public participation, so Rob is teeing up the mic, which is perfect. So if hearing the different, the conversation on the various topics that you have heard, if you'd like to come up to the mic, please state your name and your address so that we can clearly hear you, and do speak into the mic so the audio is picked up and is recorded, number one, and also transmitted to others on the other side of that camera. Any topic that we have talked about here, the 4 topic areas. Any comments? Okay. Got one?
Hi there. My name is Susan Rubinoff. I live in Wakefield, and it's great to see all of you so involved. I have a few different things, so I'll start with, let's see. Actually, do we have the... So for the commercial highway district, I appreciated the gentleman that was talking about, well, we'll just let whatever is chosen for, I wasn't ready to speak, but to let whoever wants to build to decide what it is so that there's no commonality. And I think that's what I took from it. And when I think about different builders, that they might choose to do the least expensive way of building so that it will not be beautiful. I've noticed this in Wakefield a lot when people are building, that we want something beautiful, but they just create something just because that is the least expensive. So I would be really eager to have some sort of regulation. And I'm not a regulation kind of gal, but I think that we need some consistency. I often think about Cape Cod and how they have wonderful development there, but there is some sort of facade that still keeps the historic district, but yet they do have a lot of commerce. So that might be an area to also explore. Excuse me. I actually have an email in draft for you because, the comprehensive planning, I never knew that there was a survey out. And so I ask all of you, how do you get community involvement if the community doesn't know? Now, I know when there are floods on Allen Avenue, but I did not know that there was a survey that was going out, and I know many people that would like input. So then I think about the meeting on February 22nd, which it's wonderful that it's on a weekend versus a weekday, but how are you going to get all the information out so that people can really be involved? Because there are a lot of people that have voices. I will skip to the high school. I was at the school committee meeting, and there were some very good speakers there, and I'm surprised that it still was voted to move this along to Curtis Corner Road, because there's been a lot of studies in the past that have said that there is ledge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to repeat everything because I don't have all my facts and figures, but how we all need to be more aware that it seems like a wonderful idea to move it to Curtis Corner, but is it really a good idea? And let's really look at how much money it's going to cost. The only other thing that is on the top of my mind, I love participating, but with these two wonderful boards there, it would be great if one of them was facing the audience so that we can see a little bit better. Thank you for being so understanding with my nervousness.
So let me just comment on two items you talked about. No, you can, yep, sure, you can go back there if you like. So you mentioned the comment about the commercial highway, I think it was. So again, recognize that zoning dictates the use. Mm-hmm. So you go into the land use tables and it'll tell you what you can put on that commercial highway. So, I mean, that's by right. And if the property owner desires, he or she, to develop their property, that's the first thing they're going to look at is what can I build if I decided to develop my property. So, and that's there. Zoning is there. So again, and I'm sure you're aware of that. Mm-hmm. The other, on the public awareness, we talk about that a lot. And it's difficult other than going to your house, knocking on your door and saying, please go to the website and pay attention to this. We don't do that. We can't do that. So we try to do the next best thing, which is getting public notices in the newsprint, news media. Again, the site is a very capable site, I think, in my opinion, town site. So by all means, go on there on a regular basis, get used to it. I know I do pretty regularly, and it's very usable, and you do find out what's happening in the town. And that goes to everybody. I mean, go to the site, understand what's happening in your community. That's the tool. That's one of the tools the community has to inform its citizenry. And again, other than print media and that, and obviously Facebook and a couple of others, social media types. So, but it's tough. I hear you. It's very difficult to make everybody or inform everybody about the schedule on whether it's public hearings for whatever, a development project, a subdivision, and in this case, the comp plan. We did actually extend the time period because we did get some comments that they felt there was not enough time, so we did extend it, and I think at that point we received additional handwritten comments that were very helpful and that we did look at and we talked about in a work session. So I think in that point we love to get feedback. So yes, so thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, it's interesting because I was getting the Independent for such a long time, but it switched more to North Kingstown. And so I finally got rid of that and now get the Narragansett Times, which is much more informative. So, we try. I also thought that I had signed up for emails from the town, and I must say, and I'm pretty computer literate, but it was terrible signing up for all of those. It did not make sense. And then I discovered that I really wasn't getting them because I had done it wrong. So it's not user-friendly.
Okay.
So, but thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else comment again from the public? By all means, come up to the mic. Just state your name and your address. Let's not be shy. Gentlemen, sure.
I'm sorry, can I just circle back to the listserv? Kayla, would it be possible to put out on the town's social media, what the procedure is to get signed up for the emails?
Yes, I can work with the town staff who's responsible for the social media site to get content drafted and something up there.
So I'm Roland Benjamin. I live up the hill on Rockland Drive in Wakefield. I had sat on the school committee for about 2 years, almost a full cycle. Been part of some of the discussions that you've had tonight in terms of disposition of properties. I'm going to sit because I'm just bending over like So there's a lot of history to some of that, and some of it is even involved including other committees that have spawned off of this that I'm now serving on in town. That involves analytics, developing some of the measurements to support some of these decisions. And like you said earlier about how do you have these committees communicating with each other to help support some of the goals that the towns are identifying, and then testing some of those goals to see if they actually are there. I just want to suggest that there is a lot of people in town with a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts, and some of these decisions that you do see where you have more than a usual number of people from the community coming. There's parts of this community that are in tune with a lot of these things, and especially things like disposition of school facilities and pathway this facility plans are taking. We did hear that there is some opportunities in all cases for this, and there's some people that have spent a lot of time looking and doing a ton of due diligence that just for results of elections and things like that move in a different direction, but that knowledge is still around. So as a member of another committee that's supporting different boards in the town, I just want to say that I'm available anytime you want, anytime that Rob can get you my information. It's probably on the town site at some point, but anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. Final call. Okay, so let me go back up a little too soon.
My name is Judy Warburton, and I hadn't really thought of speaking tonight. Am I speaking well enough to this? It was really nice to hear a lot of you. I loved listening to your thoughts and really appreciated the holistic ideas of what you were thinking. I was impressed, so that was really nice. Worth my time coming out this evening.
Ms. Warburton, could you do me a favor?
Louder?
Yeah, just bring the mic closer to you, or you to the mic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, that works differently. Got it. What I wanted to say is that the description of how the school committee and the town council and then the bond and ride all works, I think that the way you described it, I'm not sure is how I understand it, because I think it's already moving forward, and it sounded like you guys don't know very much about the process and where we are. I would say that it's a lot further along than Mr. Zaineski articulated. Is once the school committee decided, it appears to me that it's going to move to the building committee, and then it'll go to the town council, and it feels to me like this is just going to keep moving. I don't think there's any question that it isn't. And then the idea that the voters are approving it, I'm not quite sure about that, because why would, when other improvements like improving the vestibules, et cetera, are included in the same bond, I don't think the voters are going to vote against an education bond. And from what I'm hearing historically is this town has never turned down an education bond. So for me, this appears like it is moving. And I'm not sure that it is the best interest of the community. And I also think, and I noticed this among a lot of the committees, is that I can appreciate what you're saying about how it's hard to get the word out to everybody, but what I also am hearing is oftentimes I'm hearing people are telling me, from people on committees, they say people are telling me this, or I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing this. And I'm thinking, you're hearing this where? At Belmont? You're hearing it from where? You in your neighborhood, you live on High Street, so then you've got the ears of the people from the, Wakefield Elementary School that are speaking to you. But there's a whole bunch of people that aren't those people that you're running into. And so It feels like the school committee is just moving forward with this, and I am not sure that they have a mandate from the community at all. And that is just what I wanted to, because there were people that are far more articulate than I was that went to, I've heard it from people in the audience here as well, that attended the last meetings and the previous meetings, and there were engineers there, and not just because of the feasibility of, and that was not a feasibility study that they did, but the feasibility of developing at Curtis Corner. It really was, they gave a number, 80 million, and said that back up and show me how you can get to that number. They didn't say this is how we would build and this is what we would be doing if we were starting from scratch. And that was admitted at the school committee meeting. And I understand that the school committee is charged with doing the educational best for the children, and then they have some fiscal responsibility for the town. And I understand that the town has their fiscal responsibility for the town, and et cetera. And then everybody really needs to take charge of what they're supposed to be in charge of. And then hopefully those things will meet. But the school committee is vacating a building, and what I'm hearing from other experts who presented at the last school committee meeting, and as I think Rob just sort of confirmed, is that it's going to be difficult to dispense that property. And it is I'm not sure if you guys knew this, but it's the #1 rated school in terms of having the integrity of a facility. So the vision of developing at Curtis Corner really is a vision for a campus, and it's one that I heard at that meeting them say that they were told by friends that the other idea wasn't supported. And it was sort of a lot of anecdotal information of, like, I talked to somebody and they said they weren't excited about that idea. So we decided to go back and look at Curtis Corner. I'm really confused. It just seems really anecdotal that they're being driven by, their own wanting to have have a new campus. And it sounds to me, even I've listened to you at home many times, and I'm impressed, as I am impressed with you. You both have, your stuff. And I listened to it all, and this does not make sense. So, but I just wanted to clear up that it sounds, I didn't want you guys to think that when it sounds like this is a very active discussion, I think this conversation's over. I think the school committee's moving it forward, the building committee's going to okay it, the town council's going to okay it, and the voters are going to bond it. Any questions?
Thank you. So we're a little after 9.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the committee allow just some explanation, because I think that some of the points that have been made by the last speaker are important, and they should be addressed before the meeting adjourns. So I'd ask your indulgence. So I think it's fair to say that the conversation is fairly well advanced. I mean, I don't mean to, certainly didn't mean to imply that the process is not moving along. The school committee at its last meeting last week did say that they wanted to pursue a Stage 2 application with Curtis Corner as the situs for the high school. The school committee at its last meeting also suggested that they would like to ask the council to seek legislation allowing for a bond referendum for $85 million for November of this year. So those things are in motion. There's no doubt about that. The processes that have to happen, the legal steps that have to happen in order for this project to come to fruition are different than the sort of momentum that we've got. There's momentum. The architect has been tasked with, well, actually I should be careful about that. The architect is preparing to be tasked with doing the design work that would be necessary for a Stage 2 application. The architect does not currently have a contract that would allow them to do that work. So there has to be a contract put in place. Once that contract is put in place, they will begin the task that they're proposing to do as part of their proposed contract to do that work. That has to be approved by the school committee. The question of whether or not this application, Stage 2 application, will be submitted to RIDE is one that has to be answered at a future date. Not a date certain, but a future date before the deadline, which is September 19th or 17th. The RIDE application deadline for this round will be either the 19th or 17th of September. Before that date, the school committee and the town council will both have to approve the submission of the application. That hasn't happened. That's not been scheduled. We don't know when that is going to happen at this point. I can tell you that the school department and the architect believe that they will be able to get an application submitted before September. I've heard an August 1 sort of expectation date, but the deadline is September 17th or 19th. If the architect is able to put together a submittable application prior to August 1st, that would move the deadline or the timeline for school committee and council approval up July, June, somewhere in that neighborhood. The second piece that has to happen is the referendum question has to be sent from the town council to the state legislature. The state legislature has to vote on whether or not to allow the town to go out to bond. And then the town council has to approve a question that will actually go on the ballot. And the voters do ultimately get to decide. That's absolutely, unquestionably the process that has to be pursued. There's no way for us to issue $85 million worth of debt without going to the voters. The voters do ultimately have that final say. One note, the vestibule work that's been done recently will not be on that bond issue. The bond authorizing $4 million worth of debt was in fact approved by voters in 2014. Those bonds have not been issued, and in fact we just submitted the application today to the state's agency that oversees us to allow us to go to market and issue those bonds later this year. We're hoping to issue those bonds in the next couple of months. But that's a separate issue entirely. That's already approved. Those bonds will be going to market. That's already been approved by the voters. My point in sort of describing this as a series of steps is not to give folks some false sense of distance on where the finish line is. It's simply to describe the obstacles between where we are and the finish line. All of those obstacles have to be overcome, and the public really does have an opportunity to be involved in the description and the negotiation of those obstacles. It's democratic processes. It may not be perfect, but there really is still time and opportunity for the public to be involved and to inform the decision making. I had a meeting I will share with you today with the superintendent, the school business official, the finance director for the town, RGB, and a representative from Peregrine, because the project isn't nailed down. This isn't, all the pieces aren't in place, the puzzle is not complete. And there will be change. There's going to be change certainly in the price. There will probably be change in the allocation of funds. You're exactly right that what was presented by RGB and Peregrine at the last school committee and the last school building committee is what they call an order of magnitude budget. And it is just backing down from what we've told them the budget is. What can we get for the money that they've said they're willing or able to spend? That's clearly what has been put together to date.
That they're willing to spend? Who's they?
The town. There is.
The town knows they want to spend $80 million?
The town has produced a capital improvement plan that identifies a facility budget of $85 million, and they built to that budget. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that the $85 million will be allocated the way that it has been presented, and it doesn't mean that that's in fact what the voters are going to approve. So there's still lots of movement in this. I understand that it's not as early in the process as, gee, let's set the trajectory. The trajectory on this project has been set. There's truth to that.
What's driving this to the September, or I should say the November election? Why not bounce it 1 year and give it a little more time?
So there's the state statute requires that, or state regulations, I'm sorry, RIDE's regulations require that a bond referendum happen within 6 months of the approval by the state. The state will be receiving an application from South Kingstown in September, or perhaps earlier, but the latest time at which they would review a September application is the 3rd week in November. So you would have to wait 6 months and do an off-cycle special election, which has some expense. It's not, the expense is not really the biggest thing. But it would be a special election and would reduce the number of folks likely to show up, since special elections don't have the same number of voters as general election folks. So I think that what's driving it is a desire to make sure that all of the voters, or as many of the voters as possible, are heard.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. I think what I do want to do is conclude this meeting with while I'm looking at my planning board colleagues, minus Tom, just to go back to Larry's question to us, if there was anything that we had relative to actions that he outlined. And so, number one, before I give that to anybody on the floor, some of the takeaways for me clearly is looking at the commercial highway zoning and assessing its applicability for mixed use, even though Caleb pointed out a very interesting in reality, which is there are no dwelling units allowed per acre in a commercial highway zone. So that's a very considerable statement that we have to look at and consider. Secondly, the second takeaway, and I think there was an extensive conversation at the very beginning about parking, and that's something that we always talk about. And depending upon the use, it's something that I think I know we have conversations about it, but how do we impose and change regulations to make it more uniform is another discussion, but I think we have to do that. I think it's high time we do that. And when you look in creating density, I want to remind people and just everybody that if you look at Wakefield, the town has invested in public lots. So you have the public lot behind the Bell Block, which assists businesses meet their issues, their parking requirements. And just north is the Comfort Station, which is the latest development that was put in probably about 6-7 years ago by the town, again, to support businesses in the area. And if you look at Peacedale, there's a public supported lot for the businesses in that area, by which density, those communities, those villages are they're denser in construction and in various uses, and as a result, the town has sought fit to do public support by providing parking. So is that an option in other villages? Potentially. So let me go back to my colleagues here on the right and just looking back at Larry's question about the items as we talked about. Any comment for Larry, feedback for Larry? Pam?
Yeah, the point about the Saugatucket River Main Street, and I think that we talked about potentially having a strategic plan. I think it's really important because I think, as one of our audience members said, sometimes we hear from certain people, perhaps just around, one little neighborhood that's very interested, for instance, about the elementary school. Well, what are the rest of the citizens thinking about the downtown, which really is a town asset? So I really think that looking at a strategic plan, but I think that you mentioned it, Susan, about really getting consensus from people. So we have a student project, we have some neighborhood people, but what is the consensus of a larger community? So that I really would appreciate. I think the other that I just heard here, we're talking about something, we're talking about this economic opportunities that might be appropriate with vacant buildings. I think a really quick thing that you could do is make sure that the businesses and there's a well-represented group of people at the February 22nd event. You say that you've gotten lots of input from business owners on the commercial highway. How can we get businesses and a larger group of people at that meeting at the high school for revisioning that high school property. And if that's the one place that we're looking at. So I would really encourage you to use your contacts and your linkages with them would be really helpful. And then I do just have one other comment. I would agree, Rob, you explained the whole process really well, and I have been looking at the newspapers and trying to listen to meetings and such. I think that we would really benefit our citizens that aren't watching this or aren't streaming this to have that statement come out from you about what is the process, what has been done, where is the input, and put it out now so that people really understand what it is, because the reporters have been doing a great job, and I think that all of us are able to be mouthpieces for that, but coming out of the town hall to say, this is where we're at, this is the process, would be really useful as a way to get people to that meeting on the 22nd, and to really get the visioning that we're talking about, which is the visioning of the planning, the visioning of the economics, and the visioning of the citizens.
Thank you, Pam. Joe?
I appreciate the discussion tonight, and you gave us a lot to think about in the commercial highway and the commercial downtown, and I agree with John. I think that we need to address parking, so hopefully you can put that on our works, because we have had projects fairly recently come in front of us, and had it not been for the parking requirements, they would have either been more dense or gone up. So we need to do that. But beyond that, I'm hoping that the next time we meet, we can extend the conversation to other areas of the town outside the commercial highway and commercial downtown. And specifically, I'm kind of thinking about that 138 corridor from Taylor's Landing to the Trestle, and because it has the infrastructure there for both transportation and sewer. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and extending that conversation from you to us would be good. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? Peter, Elise, Maria? No? Okay. I think with that, I'm going to ask for an adjournment and a motion to adjourn. We have a motion by Maria. Do we have a second? Second by Joe. All in favor? We're done. Thank you.